why her? Why did he hone in on her?
The brutal murder of a Texas cheerleader is discovered by her mother when the 16-year-old's dead body is found in her own bathtub. Months after this shocking crime, her accused killer now faces a capital murder indictment.
So there's no question there is a mountain of evidence that led the grand jury, to come down with this indictment.
We're taking a look at the case so far and the top 5 most shocking revelations from the newly filed indictment.
I would be curious to know the motive behind why he was stalking her.
This month, 23-year-old Rafael Romero was indicted in the murder of 16-year-old Lizbeth Medina, a cheerleader in Edna, Texas, about an hour and a half southwest of Houston. On December 5th of last year, Medina was set to perform in the area's Christmas parade. Her mom arrived at the parade, but Medina wasn't there. Her mother later found the girl's lifeless body in the bathtub of the family home. A preliminary autopsy found she died of sharp force injuries. Edna police initially released these images from a security camera recording, labeling the man as a person of interest. The suspect was seen wearing a black hoodie and driving a white or silver car. Investigators now say that suspect was Romero, who took Medina's cell phone after the attack. That's what they used to track him down to a home in Schulenburg, Texas, about an hour northwest of the murder scene. Officials say Romero is an undocumented immigrant who was already on probation for a felony burglary conviction. And while 2 months between Romero's arrest and indictment could seem like a long time, former CIA officer and FBI agent Tracy Walder says there's a logical explanation.
I don't want to say that this is common. It's not super common, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's unusual, if that makes any sense. Part of the problem here is his immigration status. He is currently not legally here in the United States. It looks like he has overstayed the visa that he had. And so the problem is it takes a long time. You have to work with immigration, and you're working through the federal legal system and the state legal system in this case, deciding how it's going to play out, whether or not he's going to be, sent back to Mexico. And so that's really what's going on. And that is the holdup, because there's really not a question necessarily that he is responsible for this murder. Obviously, he's innocent until proven guilty, but there's not necessarily a question of that. It's more about working with all these different entities and his immigration status.
Is it
Sure.
possible that he would be sent back to Mexico right away? How would that look?
No. The short answer to that is no. What typically happens in a case like this, and we also have to remember that when this was committed, he was actually out on probation for a burglary that he had committed in September of 2022. So technically, his immigration status should have been revoked back then, quite frankly, but it wasn't. And so really what happens is the person is obviously put on trial here in the United States. And then it's after they serve their sentence that they would be sent back to their country of origin if they were not here legally. But obviously, in a capital murder case, it looks to me like he will remain in the US if he's found guilty for the entirety of his life.
After his arrest, Romero was taken to the Jackson County Jail and booked on $2 million bond. That's the same county where a grand jury heard Romero's case, leading to the capital murder indictment.
It's not incredibly graphic, but it does specifically lay out how she was killed. And I thought that was a little surprising as well. Typically, you'll just see, murder in the first, murder in the, something to that nature. But this was pretty specific.
According to the indictment, Romero killed Medina by causing her head to strike a firm surface, hitting her head with a hard object, or by repeatedly stabbing or cutting her with a sharp object. But what's still unknown, at least to the public and grand jury, is what object was used to kill Medina. Walder says it's possible investigators don't even know, and if they do, they're keeping it close to the vest.
They don't have to be in the indictment. That's the thing. That information they may just not want to make public at this time. Obviously, the defense would be privy to that information if they have it, to that evidence. They may also not know exactly why item was used, unfortunately, to kill her. There may have been a myriad of items in the home that are still undergoing, forensic testing. And so that could be why perhaps they left it non-specific so that they could add to it, and amend it at multiple times throughout this process.
But it sounds like the evidence would have been strong enough to yield a capital murder indictment, even if we're unfamiliar about what this item was or the things that led up to the murder or what happened afterward.
Right, that's why I think that they have more than enough evidence. I think they're just choosing not to disclose all of that evidence in the indictment. Really, in my opinion, we see indictments a lot, but where most of the information really lies is in the PC affidavits or the probable cause affidavits, the information that they use to ultimately arrest him. That's where most of that is. Sometimes they're sealed, sometimes they're unsealed, right? So you don't necessarily know. But really, that's where they disclose all of the evidence that they have to go ahead and arrest this person for the crime. And so I suspect it's mostly in there, and that's probably why they don't have it in the indictment.
Also unmentioned in the indictment, but made public since Medina's death, is a potential stalking scenario. The apartment Medina and her mother shared had been broken into in mid November, almost 1 month before her murder. Officials now say they believe Romero was responsible for that and other stalking like behavior.
It doesn't look like they are necessarily indicting him on the stalking instances that have since come up, regarding the burglary of her apartment about a month before her death. And so that was, I don't want to say surprising, but a lot of times those charges are tacked on. We even saw that in Brian Koberger's case, that there is a burglary charge, attached to that quadruple murder. And so that was surprising to me.
Walter says investigators are likely sitting on a large amount of evidence that hasn't been made public yet, including how Romero found Medina in the first place.
We know now that there was stalking behavior, but the question that I have is why her? Why did he hone in on her? I think that would be my biggest question. And in my opinion, I feel that social media might provide the answer to that. I don't know if he had tried to reach out to her on social media. That I don't know, but I would be interested to know the answer to that question, because it looks to me, especially when reading more about this case, one of the things he did do was open up her Snapchats, and her videos on there. They were read, after she was known to be dead, and so I would be curious to know the motive behind why he was stalking her.
And what would investigators do to get to that motive, to determine what it was?
I think, like I said, the biggest thing here, especially with a 16-year-old girl, is going to be her social media footprint. And I think really what they're going to be looking at is any time that he may have tried to reach out to her. Now, she may not have reached back out to him. I wouldn't be surprised if she didn't. But a lot of times, social media, everyone sees the pictures. Someone may have seen a friend of her friend and then he would have honed in on her from there. I think really it's going to take a while to go through her digital footprint or her digital forensics. But I do think that that's really, in my opinion, what police are focusing on.
Investigators have already admitted to using digital evidence to track down Romero, saying Medina's cell phone was missing from the scene when her body was recovered. Investigators also noted a Snapchat message sent the day after Medina was killed was opened from her phone. Several days later, Medina's boyfriend and another friend said they received a text from her phone. The messages arrived the same day a candlelight vigil was held for the girl. That's what prompted police to track Medina's phone to find Romero. Investigators say several of her personal items were found in the home Romero was arrested, including her ID. Walter says it's possible Romero didn't realize these things could be tracked.
We know, don't take digital items because they can all be, tracked and traced, and we know that. But I think it would be surprising, to learn that not everyone necessarily knows that. And so I do think that he may have not understood exactly how people would be able to hone in on his location. He may have also thought too that he disabled things, on the phone. I don't know exactly what he did, but he may have thought that he had that he had done that, to the best of his ability and left geo-tracking on, right? And so I don't know. And you also don't know who was connected to her Find My Friends. Clearly her boyfriend was, because he was the one that ultimately tracked the phone, and he may not have known that. And so I don't know if it's necessarily stupidity, because it's hard to know what actions he did or didn't take. But yes, typically, we don't take electronics from the scene of a crime.
Walter says electronics will be key in the case, even if we're not yet sure how they factor in. Even so, she says they likely played a role in grand jury proceedings. Obviously, we're not going to know what happened there behind closed doors, very secretive, but do you have any hypotheses about what may have happened to yield to this severe charge?
So obviously, I've testified in front of lots of grand juries as a former FBI agent, and the reality is typically you don't bring a case as a law enforcement officer to a grand jury unless you have over and above the amount of evidence that you need, because to convene these, all of this is taxpayer funded, right? And so we always want to be good stewards of taxpayer money. And so in my opinion, there is no question that there is a mountain of evidence. I mean, they have her cell phone in his possession. And so there's no question there is a mountain of evidence that led the grand jury, to come down with this indictment.
The indictment also notes Romero killed Medina intentionally while, quote, committing or attempting to commit burglary, robbery, or sexual assault. Walter says this answers some questions, but not all.
But it was specific, but not specific at the same time. So it's hard to know, because obviously they would have all of that evidence from rape kits that were done on the victim and those types of things. And so clearly they have that evidence. Clearly. Now, in terms of what specific type of evidence from a rape kit they have, I am not certain. However, that would just add special charges to his crime. I'm not sure if they're going to go ahead and put death penalty on the table here or not, but I think that's something that would come up in the future.
Because the case takes place in Texas, there's still one looming question. Will Romero face the death penalty? I mean, this is a 16-year-old girl killed, a cheerleader, likely beloved. She had her friend, she had her whole life ahead of her, and then she's brutally killed. Do you think the death penalty will be on the table in this case?
Well, we also have to remember stalked, right? And so then that goes towards, in my opinion, premeditation and capital murder. Yes and no. And the reason, capital murder, obviously in the state of Texas, does warrant the death penalty. It's on the table in a case like that. Again, the whole immigration situation, a lot of times in those cases, death penalty can be taken off the table, because convictions can be overturned on appeals. And so I would be very interested. That, in my opinion, is another sort of big question mark, if you will. There's absolutely no question in my mind that police will most likely not offer, the prosecutor, excuse me, will most likely not offer him a plea deal. It's going to be, life without the possibility of parole. But the question will be as to whether or not the death penalty is on or off the table. Yes, in Texas, in a case like this, it's on the table. But again, with his immigration status, I don't know.
We reached out to Medina's mother for a comment on this story, but have not yet heard back. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.